In 2023, I visited Gran Canaria. Since then, I've often been asked where certain bird species can be found on the island. As my previous videos about Gran Canaria didn't really provide specific answers, I decided to make a dedicated video on this topic. I won't be covering all species, but mainly species or subspecies that are endemic to Gran Canaria itself, to the Canary Islands or to Micronesia, and are mostly relevant for birders from Northern Europe. For taxonomy, I'm following the new AVILIST checklist, but where the CSNA, the Dutch Committee for Avian Systematics, classifies species or subspecies differently, I'll mention it because these could be future splits. We'll start with two introduced partridge species, the Barbary partridge and the red-legged partridge. The first one has become very rare. For the whole of 2025, I could only find 2 sightings. Most historical records come from the mountains, but nowadays your chances of seeing them are very slim. The red-legged partridge is much more common and is mostly seen in the northern half of the island, both in the mountains and the lowlands. I personally saw one flying across the road while driving up into the mountains from the south. It landed in a valley and began displaying. The white throat is a useful field mark compared to the Barbary partridge. Several swift species can be seen throughout the year on the island, but I'll focus on the plain swift, which is a common sight here. It's a dark swift with a barely noticeable pale throat and fairly pointed tail feathers. This species often flies lower than common swift and can be seen hunting between houses or trees. In summer, common swift is generally absent from the island, so confusion between the two is less likely during that season. The Laurel pigeon is more well known from the western Canary Islands, but it originally also occurred in the Laurel forest on the north side of Gran Canaria. Due to deforestation and wildfires, the species became extinct on the island, but a successful reintroduction project has brought it back, and the population is now self-sustaining. There's even an information center named Centro de Interpretación de los Tejas de Moya. From here, you can take a trail on either side of the road heading south. We stayed on the main road ourselves, as the trails weren't accessible with a stroller. The bird is easy to recognize by its dark appearance and distinctive white thermal band on the tail. The next dove species is quite an interesting case. On Gran Canaria, you can find Eurasian collared dove, African collared dove, and the domesticated form of African collared dove, the Barbary dove. The Eurasian collared dove is by far the most common and not particularly exciting. The Barbary dove is a domestic form of the African collared dove. Whether the individuals on the island form a self-sustaining wild population is unclear, but they are, by definition, escapees or descendants of escapees. The African collared dove itself is more interesting. Unfortunately, it's unknown whether all individuals on the island are escapees or if the species has colonized the Canaries naturally. In practice, records are often lumped together with Barbary doves. eBird, for example, considers all African collared doves on the Canary Islands as introduced and doesn't distinguish between the two. But there are also people claiming that the pure African collared doves are of wild origin. So whether you count them on your live list is up to you. They're usually found in the same areas as the Eurasian collared doves. Cities like Maspalomas and Las Palmas de Gran Canaria are good places to look. I personally had them at a holiday park in Maspalomas, 1 or 2 birds among about 20 Eurasian collared doves. The species is recognizable by its bright white undertail coverts, whereas in Eurasian collared dove these are grey. The Barbary dove is even wider overall and often smaller. Then there's another somewhat controversial species, the laughing dove. While it's often considered to be wild on the island, some believe that the individuals here are just escapees or descendants of escapees, even though the species is naturally expanding its range northwards. Either way, it's a beautiful dove species. It's darker than the Eurasian collared dove, but less contrasty than the European turtle dove, with a nicely speckled neck. The best place to find it on the island is the botanical garden in Maspalomas called Parque Tone Gallardo. It's not super common, so you might need some patience. Also, note the opening hours, which you can check on Google Maps. The entry is free. The stone curlew is represented on the island by the subspecies distinctus, which is shared only with the other Western Canary Islands. On the Eastern Canary Islands, like Fuerteventura and Lanzarote, the subspecies insularum occurs. It's a tricky species to find on Gran Canaria. The best chances are around the water reservoirs in the northeast of the island. In terms of seabirds, Gran Canaria isn't the best island. There are always chances for something interesting, but during the boat trip I took, the only species I saw was Cory shearwater. The Eurasian sparrowhawk on the island belongs to the subspecies grantii, which also occurs on other Canary Islands and in Madeira. It's not commonly seen, but your best bet is the mountain regions. I saw it multiple times flying over the Laurel forest in the north while searching for the Laurel pigeon. The common buzzard of the subspecies insularum occurs on the island. This subspecies is also found on all the other Canary Islands. The species can be seen everywhere on the island, from the mountains to the lowlands, but I didn't see many myself. The long-eared owl here is of the subspecies canariensis, which is found on nearly all Canary Islands. It's a difficult bird to find though. The best approach is to check recent sightings on platforms like observator.org or eBird. There's no one best spot for the species on Gran Canaria. There's no separate species of hoopoe on the island, but for birders from Northern Europe, it's always a nice species to encounter. They can be found all over the island, especially in the lowlands on the east side. Scanning grassy parks in urban areas can be quite productive. Woodpeckers are also found on the island. Only the great spotted woodpecker of the subspecies thorneri, however, a subspecies that is endemic to Gran Canaria. This species can be found in the forested parts of the mountains and is not very rare. The common kestrel on Gran Canaria belongs to the subspecies canariensis, which is also found on the other western Canary Islands and Madeira. It's an extremely common bird on the island. You'll see them almost everywhere. I filmed one in the botanical garden of Maspalomas, where it was completely unbothered by people. Next is the great grey shrike, a species with a lot of taxonomic debate around its many subspecies and possible splits. According to the Avilis taxonomy, the taxon found here is Lanius excubiter conii, a subspecies of great grey shrike. However, the CSNA considers it Lanius elegans conii, a subspecies of desert grey shrike. Whichever system you follow, this taxon is found on Tenerife and the islands east of Tenerife. It's easy to find and widespread across Gran Canaria. My best sighting was in the Dunas de Maspalomas. To get there, you can park at the camel route, then enter the area through the gate. The common raven on Gran Canaria is of the subspecies canariensis, found across all the Canary Islands. I found them easily in the mountain pine forest in the central part of the island. Gran Canaria is home to the African blue tit of the subspecies hedwigae, which is endemic to Gran Canaria. The CSNA has split most of the blue tit taxa across the Canary Islands into separate species, but still treats the Gran Canaria population as a subspecies of the Tenerife taxon. It's easiest to find in the mountain pine forest. The Mediterranean short-toed lark isn't doing well on the island and is becoming increasingly difficult to find. The nominate subspecies occurs here and is also still found on Fuerteventura and Lanzarote. On Tenerife, it's probably extinct. There are no photos of this species on eBird or observado.org for Tenerife. The last observation on Observado dates from 2018, while eBird has some more recent ones, with the latest one from January 9, 2024. But without documentation, these are hard to verify. On Gran Canaria, the only somewhat reliable area is the barren southeast, though it seems they're only present in winter and might breed elsewhere. I personally searched this area intensively in June and found nothing. The Canary Island chiffchaff is very common across the island. You find it pretty much everywhere, including in flocks in the pine forests. The Sardinian warbler can be a bit of a nuisance when you're searching for the rarer Sylvia warblers. On Gran Canaria, you're likely looking for the spectacled warbler. And to find one, you need to sift through dozens of Sardinian warblers. That's why I won't go into detail on the species here. The Canary Islands holds the subspecies Leucogastra, which is present on all islands. The spectacled warbler is much trickier than the Sardinian warbler. I only found a few individuals after 3 full mornings of searching. This subspecies, orbitalis, is shared with Madeira, Cape Verde and other Canary Islands. On Gran Canaria, you can find it along the coast, especially on the eastern side. The place I tried is Juncalillo del Sur. The common blackbird is represented by the Cabrere subspecies, which also occurs on the western Canary Islands and Madeira. It can be found all over the island, especially along the northern coast. I saw them scattered around Maspalomas. The European robin on Gran Canaria belongs to the subspecies Marionae, endemic to the island and considered a separate species by the CSNA. There's even a split proposal under review by the IOC, so it might become a full species in the future. I found it quite difficult to locate. The north side on the island is your best bet. I encountered it here and there in the Laurel forest, the same area where the Laurel pigeon can be found. The rock sparrow is also very scarce on the island and belongs to the same subspecies as found on mainland Europe. I didn't see it at all during my trip. The southeast of the island seems to be the best place for this species. Although the house sparrow has been introduced to Gran Canaria, the Spanish sparrow is by far the most common sparrow species. You find it all over in the typical urban and farmland habitats. The Bethel-Roach pipit is endemic to the Canary Islands and Madeira and is fairly common across the islands. It's widespread on Gran Canaria as well, although I saw fewer of them here than on the more barren Fuerteventura. Juncalillo del Sur was a good sight again, where it was more of a side species while I was searching for Mediterranean short-toed lark and trumpeter finch, which I'll get to next. The Canary Islands chaffinch is a recent split. This species is only found on the western Canary Islands, and on Gran Canaria, the endemic subspecies Paquiri occurs. Best places to find it are the pine forest in the mountains and the laurel forest on the northern side of the island. Unlike the Canary Island chaffinch, which is still considered a subspecies, the Gran Canaria blue chaffinch has been split, and is to this day the only true endemic species for Gran Canaria. At the same time, it's also an extremely rare bird, with only a few hundred individuals left. It's the main target species for many birders visiting the island. The species is only found in the high-altitude pine forest on the island. Originally, it was mostly restricted to the western part of Gran Canaria, but wildfires in that region have put the species under serious threat. Because of this, a reintroduction project was started in the central mountains, and now birds can be found at sites like the picnic area called Llanos de la Pez. If you arrive early in the day, you might be lucky and find one at the actual picnic site, but if it gets too crowded, it's best to head into the pine forest just south of the road. The original site can be reached via a small village southwest of El Luncal. There's a well-used hiking trail that leads into the mountains. The path is fairly easy to walk, though it's uneven and unpaved. Thanks to ringing studies, we now know that there is movement between both areas. Birds from both the original and the reintroduced populations have been seen in either location. So at this point, whether a bird is ringed or unringed tells us nothing about its origin. The descendants of the released birds are indistinguishable from the original population. It's a late breeder, so you might still find them singing well into the year. In June, I had them still singing. The trumpeter finch has a similar pattern to the Mediterranean short-toed lark when it comes to range and status. The subspecies Amantum is present on all Canary Islands except El Hierro and La Palma. On Gran Canaria, this species is mainly seen along the southern coast. Again, Juncalillo del Sur is one of the top locations. However, the finch is mostly seen from October through April. Outside those months, it becomes very hard to find. And last but not least, the Atlantic canary, the species named after the Canary Islands. Not the other way around, as some people think. It's found on all the Canary Islands, the Salvations, Madeira and the Azores. It's very common and you find it just about anywhere on the island.